Hey guys, Apprentice Alex here. And today, I'm going to be talking about something a little interesting while I do some meal prep. And that interesting thing I want to talk about is what I personally think are the best strongman exercises to translate into sword sport. So, the first exercise that I want to talk about is the log clean and press, specifically the split jerked variation. Now, we'll get to the split jerk in a moment, but the log, I think, has an awesome crossover of all the overheads in strongman to sword sport. Why? Well, first of all, coordination. Any kind of martial art practice is going to require a lot of coordination, a lot of different muscle groups, and log requires triple extension, coordination, and explosive movement, all of which are very important for sword sport and martial art. Just cleaning the log requires you to roll it up your body, and it puts yourself into a weight-bearing position that's also compromised and not ideal while the log is in the rack position. This mirrors a lot of the stress that you're going to be under in sword sports. Obviously, you think about grappling, someone larger than you pressing down on you. That's going to be mirrored in that log clean. Not all sword sports involve grappling, but even then, you'll still likely end up in that situation where you're in a bind or a clinch where someone is pressing down on you. To be able to maintain core stability under that kind of pressure has great carryover. Now let's talk about the press itself, locking it out overhead. I actually am a big proponent for practicing the split jerk to translate over to sword sport. Movement patterns are important. First of all, the split jerk is very explosive. Combat sport in general is based around explosive movement, not brute strength. And the split jerk has very similar movement patterns to things like a thrust, a jab, a cross, or a straight. The split jerk, I think, is an awesome exercise that builds explosive power in a similar enough movement pattern that carries directly over into sword sport. The push press and the strict press both have their benefits. The strict press, of course, is the best for building muscle and strength in an overhead position. And the push press still requires a level of coordination and explosive power that translate as well. But ultimately, I think the split jerk is the variant that will give you the most carryover into sword sport. So the next thing that I want to talk about is anything grip related. That's right, grip. After all, in any kind of sword sport or armed martial art, your grip is ultimately going to be the thing that connects you to your weapon. If your grip fails, you lose control of your weapon, and you can't win your match. I want to give a special shout out to farmer's carries. Being able to maintain grip under stress, wall loaded, and moving quickly is going to be really important to sword sport. But any kind of grip training is going to end up ultimately being great for your sword sport in general. Up next on our list, we have squats. Squats are just one of the best exercises, full stop, for building strength. Huge amount of full body strength required for the squat. You have to maintain core stability, you build leg strength. All of your power in any kind of combat sport ultimately comes from your legs, your glutes, all of which will be trained by squats. In terms of the quote-unquote classic gym lifts, the squat is the one that's going to be most direct transfer over. I think that if you're talking if you were going to do one barbell exercise to train for sword sports, squats. and squat variations. So back squats, front squats, Zercher squats, do a range. I think these are phenomenal for realistically any kind of athletic pursuit, any kind of hypertrophy work. Squats are goated for building overall strength. I suck at squats. I love squats. Squats don't love me. They beat me up really quick, but that's besides the point. Also worth noting that, squats are not a huge part of strongman in and of themselves, but they're a wonderful accessory for strongman, and they do show up in competition occasionally. Up next, we have yoke. Yoke is the ultimate expression of moving quickly and explosively under load. It also just feels badass to be moving with any kind of pace with a seemingly obscene amount of weight across your shoulders. Yoke runs, I think, are a phenomenal conditioning. I think that there's a lot of strength that translate directly over to sword sport, and most importantly, it really teaches you how to maintain strength, stability under heavy load and under extreme effort. If you can get really good at yoke runs, you'll never find yourself caving in a bind. You might be out-techniqued, but you'll never find yourself losing you'll never find yourself giving up the ghost when you come under literal physical pressure. You'll be able to maintain your cool, you'll be able to maintain your composure, even when you're feeling yourself being crushed under the weight of a larger fighter. Now, for number 5, and the final one that I recommend. And this is a little bit of a cop-out because I'm combining two, but they're very similar. And those are cornerstones of strongman. Literally. Stones and sandbags. These don't translate directly into sword sport technique. But first of all, lifting stones has got to be one of the earliest methods of resistance training that we have. I genuinely believe that if you went back in time, the earliest sports would be a foot race, a wrestling match, and who can pick up the biggest rock. I believe you literally going back to like Neolithic caveman era, who can pick up the biggest rock was probably the first strength sport humans ever developed. And to this day, with specialized training and machines and all of that, there is still a lot of evidence that shows how lifting and manipulating heavy sandbags and stones translates amazingly to all-around body strength and hypertrophy. Now, one of the things to consider with this is not just that it's a potential period training methodology. Obviously, there is some direct correlation with grappling and manipulating a heavy body in front of you. But ultimately, I think that the reason that stones and sandbags are so great for sword sports is because they're using it's literally the ultimate expression of full body training. You have to use back, you have to use biceps to squeeze the stone or the sandbag. If you're going to press, you get triceps and shoulders involved, triple extension, coordination. All of this is wonderful for sword sport. Now, I do want to throw out a quick honorable mention, and then I'm going to go back to my food prep for a second, and then we'll get back to a quick dishonorable mention or two. Not that I think those are bad exercises, but we'll get to that in a minute. My honorable mention might be a controversial one, but it's the deadlift. A lot of people think that deadlifts are really dangerous, and they certainly can be. But ultimately, what deadlifts are is one of the most extreme and beneficial back exercises that you can do. This is important because putting out your back is a thing in just about any athletic pursuit, and strengthening your back through deadlifts as the primary, and then accessory work like rows and other forms of triple extension are really going to ultimately benefit your career in any kind of athletics, but definitely sword sport, where you do come under compromised spinal positions fairly regularly. Strong back is going to be a stable back, and a stable back is going to be a lot harder to hurt in a sword sport, a sword fighting context. So I think that while not one of my 5 top ones, the deadlift is something that if you're looking to get a gym routine going for sword sport, is worth practicing. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast when it comes to racing, and also when it comes to progress. Don't go too heavy too early and screw yourself up. That'll be a problem. But good deadlifts with good technique, with steady but not excessive progression, is going to really reinforce your back for sword sport. All right, now to finish this video off, let's talk about my couple of quote-unquote dishonorable mentions. Again, these are not bad exercises by any stretch of the imagination, or bad events. But I think that they don't necessarily provide the same direct crossover into sword sports that the 5 exercises / events that I previously talked about do. First up, we have bench press. Bench press is a great exercise. It's a staple of gym culture. There is some pushing motion that happens in sword sports, but ultimately I don't think that of the big gym lifts, if you want to talk about the big 3, the bench, the squat, and the deadlift, I think the bench has the least direct carryover into sword sport. Great, if you have a big bench number, that's awesome, mad respect. If you really like bench, that's awesome, mad respect. I don't personally love bench, but I keep it in my program anyway, because there is carryover into strongman, even if we don't necessarily bench in competition, hardly ever. But I think that it's one that, because it is so iconic, when people who are involved in sword sports jump in to the gym training as an accessory to their sword sport, the bench press draws them in. I would actually say military press, overhead translate better, even though this seems to be more of a movement pattern that you see in sword sport. But I think that there's better exercises for building that forward motion that we see in sword sport than the bench press. Also, you're not really pushing from below in that same way. You're much more likely to be rising up through a wind, a clinch, a grapple, etc. Pushing something out of the way up overhead. I think the overhead press is, if we want to talk about the idea of real world strength, translates better than the bench press. Number 2 is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive based on what I previously talked about, and that is the frame carry, with the caveat that the frames sometimes involve straps. If you're strapping into a frame, there are benefits to this, but you're better off doing something like a yoke. You're more likely to have pressure coming down on you from above in a sword sport context, unless you're the person that's so huge that you're always the biggest guy on the field. But then ultimately you end up in that situation where you're used to being the biggest guy on the field and then coming down. So I would say skip the frame, do the yoke, unless you're doing it strapless, which is also something that happens pretty regularly. But if you're doing finding a strapless frame to practice on is going to be a lot harder than a set of farmers. And hell, you can do just farmers with plates at the gym or dumbbells. There's so much you can do. And the final one that I want to talk about as a quote-unquote dishonorable mention is circus dumbbell press. This is a technical, explosive lift, but I think that the carryover from something like a log jerk or even a barbell or an axle overhead is ultimately better than the dumbbell press. Dumbbell is it's like, for example, a split jerk. It's very technique and explosivity driven, but it's not following necessarily a movement pattern that's going to be as practical in sword sport. And I think that the learning curve is steep enough that if you're not actively pursuing strongman, there's no reason to go after circus dumbbells as an accessory for sword sport. Anyway, I hope this video has been informative for people. I hope that they enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe. If you really like the content and you want to see more of this more regularly, please consider dropping a little bit of support through my Patreon. Every bit helps and can move towards me getting more consistent with my content creation as well as churning out product from the forge. Anyway, it's been great. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.